Hello everyone, Jason from Truth Behind the Magic here. This is not a video I'd really planned on making, but it was honestly just today that I got up and decided that this is a topic that probably needs discussing. This is probably the biggest news to come out of Disney since the Horizon Showcase, showing all the major changes that are going to be coming mostly to Disney World, but other places as well. And since then, there hasn't been a lot of big news, but this is undoubtedly the biggest since then. In some ways, maybe bigger than that news, probably not, at least in my opinion, because I'm a big Parks fan, but in some ways it might be. And this is, of course, the news that is being reported by Inside the Magic, WDW News Today, Blog Mickey, a lot of other big Disney news sites, as well as mainstream media associations, and that is that Disney has decided to eliminate the majority of their DEI initiatives. And as far as I can tell, this is mostly in regards to things that actually require some sort of quota or a percentage to be met with what Disney calls marginalized communities. They claim that they are shifting from that sort of mindset towards more so achieving business goals being their primary focus. And I guess I should have said this at the beginning, but I kind of want to preface this by saying this is a controversial topic. There's really no way to sugarcoat it. I don't plan on being political here. That is not the purpose of this channel. I wish Disney had adopted that philosophy in recent years of not being political, but yeah, the goal here is really just to give honest opinions that are, quite frankly, blunt at times, but opinions that you probably won't hear from most Disney media people for various reasons. That's really the goal here, but I do not intend, in fact, I can just say I will not be getting political with this. I'm going to give some opinions which might kind of straddle that line a bit, but they're not political opinions. It's just kind of calling it how I see it. But anyway, with that out of the way, I will continue with this. So, yeah, they've cut programs relating to executive bonuses and salaries where they had to have a specific quota. I believe it was 30% of their bonus or something like that was related to DEI initiatives. There's also some other things going on with the media side of the company as far as Disney Plus. They're removing some of the advisory things that they had before certain films would run. They're replacing those with, as far as I can tell, a thing on the actual movie page itself, or the show page, whatever it is, that is a warning there. They're getting rid of the one that actually plays before the movie. But this whole thing, I don't think this is something that just now was decided upon. Well, I do think the catalyst of it was the second election of Donald Trump. I mean, there's just really no way around that. But even though that is the catalyst event, I do not think that was the deciding factor in this. I think this was something that had been thrown around for a while, and they just had to find the right time to do it. And I'll kind of get into that here as to why I believe this is happening. I think this really began with what I would call the failures of a lot of the movies and TV shows coming out of the company, whether that be the mainstream films or Disney Plus originals, that sort of thing. And it's not necessarily just because of DEI factors. Like, I'm not even at all saying that that's the primary factor. Like I said, I don't want to get political with this, but I just think when shareholders began to take a look at this in a deeper fashion, and they wanted answers as far as why did this movie lose money, or why did this film only make $100 million when it should have made $800 million, that sort of thing. And they wanted to get some answers on that. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, and it's all just speculation, but I think shareholders for a while have been probably wondering what is going on with the company in terms of the quality of stuff that's coming out and some of the motives behind it. And really, I think this whole thing comes down to money, in a sense. Not even just money, though, the success of the company, which is good for everyone associated with the company, the cast members, shareholders, fans. I think it really boils down to that, as far as really even having anything to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. It boils down to what shareholders have been wondering for a while as to why certain things are going on. But yeah, I think, for example, something like Little Mermaid, when you've been handed a property like that is so successful in terms of music, animation, the story, people just love it all around. When you've been handed a gift like that and you bungle it so badly that the movie, it didn't lose money by any means, but it was not seen as a success. It certainly wasn't the level of the Lion King live action or anything like that. And once again, I'm not saying that DEI is even the sole factor in that, but bringing it back to tie into the whole shareholder thing, I think some of these big conglomerate shareholders were thinking, how are you handed a property like this and barely turn a profit with it when you could have done things differently in some manner and potentially had a live action film that was seen as better than Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, who knows what. But I mean, I hate to kind of pick on that one as an example, but it was just probably the most notorious of the recent films that have come out from them that have kind of been seen as flops. Even though, like I said, it wasn't a total flop. It did make some money, but that was one where shareholders were probably wondering, why did this not eclipse $1 billion in revenue, as opposed to 400 million, 500 million, whatever it got. But yeah, I think that's step number one, is the beginning of the struggles in the entertainment part of Disney especially. And I think this really came to a head in the Disney vs. Desantis debacle, as I will call it. That was, of course, when Bob Chapek formally made a statement essentially pitting the company in an official capacity against the state of Florida and the Parental Rights and Education Bill. The public reason for this was because they felt like cast members, especially, as well as the fan base, were opposed to this. Now, I was working there during this time period, and I don't want to get on too much of a sidetrack on that because I probably will make an entire video discussing Desantis versus Disney. But some of the public perception and what actually happened there, I think, is a little bit incorrect, and I probably will go into that eventually. But basically, in terms of this video, the big thing is, like I said, Bob Chapek comes out against a bill which is purported to be conservative in nature. This decision ultimately led to Disney losing their self-governing status at Disney World in Orlando. And I think it's not a stretch to say this was the biggest failure and probably the dumbest thing that has ever been done in Disney history. If you disagree, feel free to post something in the comments. I know there have been others, and I'd be interested to hear your input on that. But I think the people are right when they say this is something that will be taught in business curriculum for decades, if not centuries to come, is when you have an agreement that is just so immaculate and gives you power greater than any other competitor in the world, really, that you do not do something to mess that up. But once again, kind of going off on a tangent there, but in the terms of this news, the current news, the big thing was that Disney came out against that policy, and that kind of just furthered their position as a political entity, I feel, at least for me personally. And the public felt that way as well. I recently found out, I was actually kind of ironically doing a study for a paper in one of my master's courses, and I'm doing it on Disney, and one of the sources I found is from Axios, and this came out in 2023, and I'll put it in the description if you want to actually read their report. But they do a poll, Axios Harris poll, of the top 100 companies and people's public sentiment on their reputation. And after this whole Disney and Desantis debacle, they actually fell 12 spots in 1 year on this list, which is pretty shocking. And that's a list that's voted on by the public, as far as I can tell. So that's pretty substantial for the company to come out against something like that, and to see a loss of reputation on that scale. And I think that was a shock, and that's why Bob Chapek was, I won't say scapegoated, because he was the CEO who publicly made that statement, but he was definitely the person who took the fall for that. And he probably should have been. I don't know ultimately who made that decision, but like I said, regardless of politics, not trying to get political in this video at all, but that was a revenue-losing decision. And I think it was probably the biggest factor in what is currently going on with their decisions on stuff like DEI. The third factor, not as big as that one. I think the failure of the Starcruiser has to do with these decisions, and you're probably wondering, what does the Starcruiser have to do with DEI? And it's not that it really has to do with DEI, but I think this was a huge slap in the face to the company, as something that told them, you cannot do whatever you want and get people to pay for it. I'm not sure who came up with the idea for the Starcruiser. I don't know if they're still employed, but Disney learned that they cannot put out something and the fans will just automatically get in line in unison and patronize it. So that's why I think it in some ways ties into this, because even though it's not related to DEI specifically, the company had to look at something and say, wow, we actually have to think about people's economic status, what's going on with the world, how big of a fan base a certain property has, and we can't just slap our name on it and get people to come pay to visit it. And I think that's probably the biggest physical failure that Disney's had, at least in recent times, because that was a pretty massive failure. I was actually working there when it was in operation, and it was kind of odd to be working at Hollywood Studios during that time, but yeah, so not as big of a factor, but something that I do think had a effect on how the company viewed the current situation. And the fourth and final factor in all this, as I mentioned a little while ago, the election of Donald Trump for a second term was, I think, the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, for this. I think the company may have come to the conclusion that their fan base may have not been where they expected them to be socio-culturally. Once again, to mention the Axios poll, dropping 12 reputation points in a single year over coming out against a bill, may have made the company realize our fans are maybe not quite where we think they are. Not necessarily on a political spectrum, that does play in, but just what people want to hear from a company and what they want to receive when they visit somewhere. And I think it's also worth mentioning that Disney's largest audience base, especially when it comes to the theme parks, is still families with children. And I think Disney may have miscalculated the viewpoints of people like that into thinking this was something that would resonate with them, which I'm sure it does for some, but for others, clearly it does not, from that Axios poll. And I also want to mention that I do not think that hiring a diverse range of employees is inherently DEI. I think DEI has become a major buzzword to really cover a lot of things. And I think the big difference is once you start requiring quotas, percentages to be met in regards to certain demographics, that sort of thing. I think that's when a line gets crossed in the minds of, frankly, the majority of people. And I would just say Disney does thrive on diversity, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's just an obvious statement. You know, you look at the World Showcase, most of those countries have some sort of cultural representative program where they bring in people from that country to work there, and I think that's great. It is an asset to the company. It is a benefit. It raises the level of authenticity. It gives people the opportunity to represent their country on an international scale at somewhere as massive and important as Epcot and Disney World in general. And there are other examples outside of that. But like I said, I just think, especially in the perception of the public, there's a big difference between that and when you say you have to require, 50% of the people working on this film or whatever it may be to be from marginalized communities. And I believe that actually was a part of Disney's initiatives before they canceled this. That was a goal, was to get 50% working on each project. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong on that as well. I'm not directly quoting that, but I have remembered reading that in the past. Maybe that was just thrown around tangentially, but I think it's possible. And like I said, this may be controversial, but I'm really not being political with it. I'm just looking at it from what I see, people's sentiment, the way the company is trending. I do think there's a chance that Disney enters a second renaissance period in the near future, not just because of these DEI decisions, but just from things I see being thrown around, looking at the financial reports. Shareholders are kind of finally coming around, and executives as well, and saying the prices are driving people away right now. We need to look at this. We've kicked the can down the road for long enough. It's probably time. We're losing attendance now. We are losing revenue from this. We need to make decisions. I think this DEI decision is a big part of that. Not just in the theme parks, the movies as well, Disney Plus. Like I said, the optics of that, I think, are going to boost the public perception of the company. I'll be interested to see if Axios does this poll again. I believe they do it annually. And I'll be interested to see if the company increases in that capacity. But yeah, when it comes to economy, that's another really big factor in the success of the company, because the physical medium of Disney, the theme parks, resorts, that sort of thing, that's still where they make the majority of their revenue. Despite the success of the media outlets, especially Marvel has been a big boost to the company. As mentioned earlier, some of the movies in different capacities have struggled, to say the least, but I think the economy is what really drives the park attendance. And I think it's good that people high up in the company are starting to realize and mention this, that there may be an issue with pricing. And they've really tried to blame inflation, which I do understand. It is a problem, but I also, in doing the same research for the master's course that I found the Axios poll in, I found out that research has shown Disney ticket prices outpace inflation by roughly 9 times, at least in recent years. So, in a way, you can point your finger at inflation, but I think things are going to have to be looked at a bit deeper than that to solve this issue. I do think that despite the price, there are people who may have stopped going to Disney or have just not even been thinking about it, that once they hear this news that I'm discussing in this video, are probably going to think, I might go spend some money down there right now. And like I said, regardless of how you feel about it politically, I think for the company, for the fans, I think it's probably going to be a benefit to the company. These decisions, like I said, they've probably been thinking about it for a while, but they really wanted there to be a major event that proved their... I don't know if anyone realized that the fans were maybe socio-culturally different than expected. I know I'm kind of rehashing this again, but I'm getting to the end here, so I'm kind of just going over it. But I think they were just waiting for an excuse, essentially, to implement this, and that time is now. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do in the near future, both in terms of this and the economic aspects of the company. I frankly hope they do well. Like I just said 2 minutes ago, I think it will benefit everyone involved with the company if they start to see some success. I think they've struggled for a while, and by a while I mean multiple years, if not decades. I mean, not decades plural, but a while now. And I really think if the focus is put back on releasing entertainment that is good for everyone, good for the entire family, regardless of who you are, just the primary focus being on putting out a product that is quality entertainment, with that being the only agenda, so to speak, I think they're going to see some good things in the near future. But yeah, I guess that'll be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I didn't really go over all the details of the news, but I more so wanted to give my opinions on it as someone who has been a cast member and that sort of thing. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I'll see you next time.